So I'm going to call the September 15th Circulation ILL Advisory Group meeting to order at 9:34 a.m. Doing a quick roll call. We have Belinda,
Yes.
Kim, got
Yes.
Danny.
Yes.
See Athena.
Yeah.
Matthew.
Yes.
I see Jasmine is here. Hi, Jasmine.
Hello, sorry, I'm having like technical difficulties, but I'm here. Hello.
Hello, Jasmine.
Hey, Matthew.
Bob Bigden Russell is not present now. He may come later. And then we have Brent as a guest. Hi, Brent. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everybody.
So we are going to get started. Next topic is the approval of minutes from the last meeting. I did get a correction from Kim. So I made those corrections and resent out the revised minutes. Were there any other corrections or adjustments to the minutes? In that case, we will accept the minutes from our June meeting as written. Are there any additions to today's agenda? Cool. We do not have any formal old business carrying over from the last meeting. So we are going to go ahead and launch right into our new business. I'm going to share my screen. So again, the first thing we're going to start with is, sure. First thing we are going to start with is an overview of the Circ ILL advisory group. First meeting of the year, I do like just kind of review the purpose of the advisory group and the expectations for the committee members. So the Circulation ILL Advisory Group, these are kind of the primary roles of an advisory group. They consult with CCS on potential system configuration changes. They'll assist with research and testing, such as like testing potential new settings or testing new tools, like we did with Vega. The group will also make recommendations for things like policy changes or workflow best practices to their associated technical groups, which for this advisory group are both the circulation group and the interlibrary loan group. And then in terms of your roles as group members, you will be representing the CCS community in these meetings. And this is going to be a little different from those technical group meetings because at technical groups, you're, primarily representing your own library. But here in an advisory group, you're speaking for like CCS libraries as a whole. So we will plan for 4 advisory group meetings this year. And then in addition to the advisory group meetings, you're also expected to attend your associated technical group meeting. So like if you are primarily circulation staff, you will plan to attend the Circ Tech Group meetings. If you're primarily ILL staff, you'll plan to attend the ILL Tech Group meetings. And then in between meetings, I may send out emails like asking for feedback on a question, or, just asking for an opinion on something. And then finally, as our discussion topics or recommendations are taken to technical group meetings, and as you're participating in those discussions, you can then give input from the perspective of an advisory group member. So as I mentioned before, one of the main roles of this group is to give recommendations on things like shared workflows or policy changes, but what happens with those recommendations? So we have a decision matrix that guides where recommendations go, depending on what the impact of those changes will be. So kind of reviewing our matrix, If there is no change to workflow or no like financial or HR impact, CCS can take the recommendation from the group and implement it. So an example of this was a recommendation back in like 2019 to increase patron notice history display from like 3 months to 6 months. Since something like this doesn't impact staff workflow, CCS was able to approve and implement the advisory group recommendation without taking it to the technical group for like full formal approval. If the recommendation will impact workflow, but there's no financial or HR impact, the recommendation will go to the appropriate technical group for approval. So this will include the majority of our recommendations. So, the things we commonly see here in the CIRC-IL advisory group are like establishing a shared workflow, like the damaged item procedures. Or, if we're talking about an ILS setting change, like being able to cancel held holds. Those are all recommendations that will impact staff workflow. So we'll take those to the technical group for final approval. And then finally, this is a rare situation, but if the recommendation would create a financial or HR impact, or if it's like the addition of a service system-wide or a formal policy change, and what we're talking, when we're talking about policy here, it's the governing board policy manual. So for those types of changes, the advisory group would make a recommendation. The technical group would then review and decide to also make that recommendation. And that is then taken to governing board, and the governing board would make the final approval. So these would be like really big things, like something we'd require, all libraries to have like a full-time phone attendant on staff. Or we're going to make being like fine-free a formal policy for all CCS libraries. So really big stuff like that. But there are also going to be times that governance is going to task this group with a decision. So another example from the 2019 year, it was decided that we needed system-wide hold slip standards, and governance tasked this group with crafting those standards, right? So in those cases, like we're not making recommendations to take to another body, but we are completing a task given to us by governance. An example of like that today is looking at our manual item recovery guidelines. So we'll plan to meet 4 times this year. All meetings will be held through Zoom. So here are the 4 meeting dates. Obviously, there's today, September 15th. We'll also be meeting December 15th, March 8th, and June 14th. If we don't have any pending agenda topics, I will cancel the meeting. So I'm just going to pause for questions at this time before we move on to our first action topic. Cool. Okay, so you ready to dive in? So our first action topic is on manual item recovery guidelines. So I do want to take a few minutes to give some background here. Returning committee members will remember discussing this at our June meeting. So for those who weren't present at the June meeting, just give some context for the new committee members. So some CCS libraries manually reach out to patrons with lost items to encourage item recovery. So this manual contact is in addition to the automated Polaris notices. Right now, we don't have guidelines about what manual item recovery can look like. And because we're in a consortium environment, these efforts can look different from library to library. So like examples of workflows is like you may contact patrons who checked out, otherwise known as transacted, at your library, like regardless of their home library. Or a workflow, maybe you contact patrons registered to your library, regardless of where they checked out. Or you may do both, right? You may contact patrons registered to your library and patrons who checked out at your library. And because there are all these potentially different approaches to contacting patrons, this can become confusing for patrons and staff. So one of our goals as a consortium is to foster a consistent patron experience. So the advisory committee held this general discussion at the June meeting, and we did determine that guidelines would be helpful. The discussion and the group's thoughts were then taken to executive committee's July meeting. So executive committee was also in agreement that we should have guidelines, but they determined that the guidelines should be consistent with how patrons are submitted to collections. Just to add here, in case there's people present who are not part of a collections library, patrons are submitted to collections by their home library. So that's all based on the patron's registered library. So based on that direction from executive committee, we drafted these guidelines. So the guideline draft states, Polaris will issue an automated bill notice when an item reaches 45 days overdue. If a library intends to manually contact patrons over billed items, in addition to those automated notices, efforts should be limited to patrons registered to the library or non-CCS reciprocal borrowers who checked out from their location. The library should not contact patrons registered to another CCS library. So the guidelines establish that libraries should contact users registered to their own library, but also addresses non-CCS borrowers that may use your location. So we will be using these guidelines, but before we formally move to approve and adopt them, we want to make sure that the language is clear. And so that is what I'm posing to the group today. So I'm gonna pause here, give you a moment to read through it again, and I'll take questions and comments. So I've got a chat. I think the language sounds clear. It makes sense to only contact patrons registered to your library. I didn't realize other libraries were participating in manual item recovery. It's great to have these guidelines in place now to know. I'd say I think we know of about maybe 3 libraries doing manual item recovery at this time, but it's absolutely something that could more and more libraries could adapt. So
Amico,
was a
this
good idea.
was something that I had thought really strongly about, and this was my argument was if we were to send to collection, which we have paused, to me it's not any less confusing to the patron because they're going to get a letter anyway saying to contact us. But just to give some context, we have recovered $14,500 in either materials or patrons paying off their account. And 231 patrons have cleared up their accounts completely. And this is even materials going back to 2019. People still do have them and are returning them. So it is pretty successful, at least for Niles.
That was my next question, was if anyone had any data. So thank you for sharing. That's really amazing. That's cool. So do you guys just email usually or just call or?
So we were taking the three-pronged approach. I would email first, and then I would have another staff person call, and then we would mail a letter. We're a little bit busier now and short-staffed here at Niles still, so we're just doing the letters at this time. But even that is still proving to be successful. I'd say every other day we're getting materials back still.
Athena, is that only your patrons or are you including the ones you contact that checked out at your library?
So we are just doing registered at, so just our
Okay.
patrons. Mhm.
Just, I wanted to make sure because previously they were doing, if you checked out at that library, they would contact. So you're just doing your library.
Yes, when I
Okay.
think where the confusion Des Plaines was doing checked out, and we have a lot of overlap.
Thank you for clarifying. I just wanted to make sure.
Mhm. And this way, the patrons are also not incurring that $10 collection fee too. You know, we're trying to just keep it as nice for them as possible.
Hey, Mieko, I know that all of our notices are, if you have email notices, are sent out at 45 days, like, hey, it's overdue, and we don't do collections. I'm just wondering, with information overload and the amount of emails people are experiencing, just for future, is there a way to possibly change the last one to mail? I know, no, I feel like that's going to be a lot of costs, but I just wondered, you know, if we had that option, or is there a way that we could, is there like a report that I can pull in web reports that tells me, besides the daily search shelves, what's about to be billed? Do you know?
I would say the daily search shelves would be the primary report. I do not know of another one that lists overdue items approaching 45 days.
Okay. So I could just come up with a canned response to my patrons and email and put a letter out to them that way. Okay. Just trying to figure out something, you know, mentally thinking.
So
We
if
do.
you were to, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say what we do for the daily search shelves is we have one of the reports set for us so that we have like 42 days overdue so that we could get it, check the shelves before an email would go out to the patron. So I'm wondering if maybe checking it, you know, checking one of those dates earlier might be helpful before it goes so that you can check before. I'm not really sure. I know everybody has their own kind of method and it works for them, but that's been working for us. That way people don't email us and say, hey, or, you know, call us. We got an email. It's not true. But I don't know that it would be much more work for the letter. I mean, we print bills off now.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure how many more would be generated, but it's an interesting option. That was my that's my input. I'm sorry, Mieko, go on ahead.
Yeah, no, and that's, you know, if you ever did want to get an idea of volume, there is that web report, daily notice delivery report, I think it's called, and it will tell you like how many bill notices your library emailed out. So you can kind of get an idea of volume that way too. So if you were to just open up the CERC manual and read these guidelines, would they be clear enough to you that you would understand who you are able to contact and who you are not able to contact?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I would say so. I was actually looking at this just before the meeting, and I think it's pretty clear, the language.
Would the group feel ready to make a motion to accept these drafted guidelines?
I can make a motion.
I'll second.
I think the answer is yes, Mieko. We're ready.
Okay, so let's do it. Let's do it. Okay, go ahead,
All
Kim.
right.
Yes, I make a motion to accept the language proposed for manual item recovery. For items billed at 45 days overdue, we will only contact patrons registered at our library or a non-CCS reciprocal borrower.
I will second that.
And Danny seconds.
Mhm.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed?
You can adjust the
so we-
language, Mieko, however you want for my motion. So
I'm gonna type it all out. What are you talking about? Okay, so this is we will add this to the CERC manual then. Our next steps are going to be looking at reporting needs so we can get kind of a uniform report set up that libraries can use. So that is the next questions I want to pose to, I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second. Next questions I want to pose to the group is about the reports. So I want to know like what information would be helpful for you to have in a report so that libraries can like properly identify and contact the patrons. So obviously this report would be users registered to your library or non-CCS reciprocal borrowers. And then what other data would you need in that report or would be helpful to have in that report?
Well, maybe the threshold of how much is owed, does it reach a certain amount of money before you pursue it? I don't know, just throwing that out.
And would you like to see like each billed item or just a sum for a patron?
Maybe the sum.
Yeah, it's very overwhelming to see each individual
Yeah.
item.
I kind of feel like Bob's report on the, what is it, the daily amount owed under the finance on web reports. If you just had that as without the item amount, I don't know if anyone else looks at that. What is that called? The daily detailed payment report, which kind of offers patron barcode, maybe the how many days, like not having it fall off after a certain amount of time, just keeping it on there as a consistent. So that way you can say, oh, the payment date, or not payment date, but the bill date is on there and you can see what you've done. I'm looking at how Bob has, or how it's late. I shouldn't say Bob. I just assume it's Bob because it's web
It is Bob.
reports. So he
Bob
has
does all
it
the
laid,
work there.
yeah, he has it laid out as like station library, billing library, patron library, item library. I think item library is also very helpful, just so you kind of have an idea, but I don't think it needs to be there if we're just going to do the patron barcode and we can look at that account because they may return something by then.
It's true.
And then just the dollar amount.
Currently for Niles, Bob has it set up one report of patrons who qualify to be submitted to collections, and then another report that's patrons with an account balance. I would prefer to just see it all in one, and then you could just sort it.
Do we know what the report looks like that Bob also created for Displays? Because I know he created one for Michelle. I guess I could look that up in web reports, but something, it may be similar to Athena's too.
I think he copied Displays for us. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then obviously we'll need patron barcode, patron name, that kind of stuff. Would having both email and address make sense, or would that be stuff you just like look up in their record anyways?
I think that's look up and even patron name. I mean, it's helpful, but the barcode's really what we're gonna click on to see, get all the rest of the scoops.
So in probably late September, early October, we'll start like crafting a report or drafting a report. Might send it out to the group then for just to have your eyes on it. See if it's like layout is helpful, if there's any data missing. And then we'll get that kind of the reporting elements set up there.
Could you repeat
Um,
what information that you thought we would need for it when we were talking? I got distracted to
Yeah.
check that report out that Kim was talking about, so I don't want to miss any of it.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so how much the patron owes. That'll
Right,
be
the
a
total
sum
amount,
of
right? Not
the
the
total
item
amount,
amount,
yes.
right?
We have comment about the daily detail payment report setup. Maybe a
Mhm.
nice one to mirror. The items owning library may or may not be helpful.
You know what, now that you say it, I mean, when I look at another report, I'm trying to remember which one it is. It might be bill payment when I'm working on my statistics for the month. I mean, I just kind of like hide that column. It doesn't really
Okay.
affect me in a negative way. I don't, just at least at this point, I don't use that information. I think not that I want to
good to
pile on the info, but if it's helpful to some people, it might be. But it would be when we did a quick check to say, well, don't recognize this person's name because they check out at other libraries. But I'm sorry, go ahead.
It's okay. And then patron barcode,
Mhm.
and maybe their name.
Yeah.
And then a reference to checking the reports, Niles patron with account balance, and then the Displanes version. So kind of using the existing Niles and Displanes reports along with daily detail payment report to kind of get a idea of how it should be structured.
I just thought of something. I like the name because some libraries have internal cards that might be there. And then I also think having the patron code, because if it's a school,
Ah.
I can see that getting very, oh yeah, that's a school that go, just so you could kind of balance that out and just send it right to the person in your library that handles it.
Great point. I mean, book clubs, homebound patrons, all those things
Yeah.
pop up, definitely. Great, great, great.
Would you like to see those in-house use cards, or should those be automatically excluded?
I like to see them.
Yes, I've got to make some calls. Hello. Knock, knock, knock. Yeah.
I don't think any card should be excluded.
Mm-mm.
Great. So we will kind of announce these guidelines then at the October Circ Tech meeting. And we'll, depending on how much time we anticipate it'll take to get reports together, we'll then also kind of announce like a official start date for using the guidelines at that time as well. I'm going to try time it to like the first of a month. So potentially like November 1st then, since tech group will be October 13th. So stay tuned for that. Any other comments or questions on the manual item recovery guidelines before we move on to our next topic? Let me reshare my screen then. Okay, so the next thing on our agenda is talking about new setting option as of our most recent upgrade. So this setting gives us the ability to use a single name only in a patron record. So some background here. Before the 7.4 upgrade, patron records required staff to input both a first name and a last name into the record. So you could not save a patron record unless both fields were filled out. The new setting removes that first name requirement. So patron records can be saved with only a last name. So how would LEAP behavior change if this setting is implemented? So first, if staff save a record that has a last name only, LEAP will display an alert asking staff to verify that the patron does not have a first name. Or staff would have the option to select a use single name field checkbox in the patron registration work form. And then when this checkbox is active, LEAP disables the first name and last name fields. And because the first name field is disabled, LEAP will then not display that pop-up when saving a record. So the checkbox serves as an indicator that the patron deliberately has a last name only. One additional change that came with this in 7.4 is that the last name field can now support up to 100 characters to accommodate single name only. And also because of how names are indexed in Polaris search tools, staff would not see a change in how they search for names. So their experience with the quick search and the full LEAP find tool should be the same whether or not you have a first name or not. So this setting can be enabled by branch. But if we enable it, we would either enable system-wide for all CCS libraries, again, to maintain that consistent patron experience, or we would enable just for the ILL for Cooperative Computer Services branch. So I have my training LEAP up here, and somewhere, let's see. Yes. So I just kind of want to show you then, oh, hang on. I need to stop and reshare my screen. There we go. There we go. So I just want to show you then kind of what it looks like live. So everything will happen under the patron registration area. So right now I have it set to where first name is not a required field. So initially, let me just kind of show you. I'm going to make this user a mononym patron. So just last name data. And then when I save the record, by default, LEAP will then prompt me and say hey, no first name is entered. Do you want to continue? I'm going to cancel out real quick. So the other element that's been added is this use single name field checkbox. And when that is selected, as you can see, it deactivates the first name and last name field. So that's the flag to LEAP that this is a deliberate last name only. And then when I save it, it's going to save the record without any kind of additional alert. So that is what the new feature looks like. Let me reshare my PowerPoint. Okay. So I am splitting this agenda topic up into two separate recommendations. So one is just going to be just for the ILL for Cooperative Computer Services branch. For those who don't work with that branch, that is where non-CCS libraries have records in our database, and it can be used to like check items out to those institutions before like mailing things through out of system interlibrary loan. So our first recommendation is going to be talking about the setting for ILL for CCSB. And then we're going to talk about the setting in regards to like all other remaining library branches. So with the CCS ILL for CCS branch, again, these are all public libraries, special libraries, university libraries. Since the use of both first name and last name fields are required, staff currently need to split an institution's name up into at least 2 fields. So for public libraries, our current convention is to enter the library's delivery code into the first name field, and then the institution name into the last name field. For academic libraries, the current convention is to enter the library's delivery code into the first name field, the library's name into the middle name field, and the university's name into the last name field. If we enable this setting for the ILL for Cooperative Computer Services branch, all text would be entered into the single name or the last name field. So CCS does have the ability to globally update records registered to this branch. So we would take the text in the first name and middle name fields and then prepend them to the last name field. So it appears just like in this chart. So I think this is going to be, the ILL Tech Group does not next meet until February. And that kind of gives us time to kind of really consider what a change to this setting is going to look like. So for today, we are going to focus on if this field should be activated. And if we are going to recommend enabling this field, then we can take our next advisory group meeting to discuss like what name conventions should look like going forward. So, you know, I don't know if anyone had a chance to like play around with this in the training LEAP. So if you did, I'm really curious to hear your experiences or what you thought.
I found it really easy doing it. Found a lot of library cards, like created a couple different ones and tried it both ways. Very easy. My question is for the next action item.
I don't do the ILL here. Our CERC department doesn't do it, so our adult services does. But I'd be curious to hear what other folks that do ILLs would feel about it. I know we've had this discussion before in CERC tech groups about, and maybe our ILL, I go to both, that how incredibly complicated it is to come up with this format to make sure we do what we're supposed to do to get all the information. It seems like a no-brainer to me, but I don't know what the downside would be if there is one.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I wanted to get feedback from those who spend a lot of time in ILL and what could be, you know, since I'm still learning ILL myself, you know, what could be the, if any, disadvantages.
Yeah, I messed around a little bit too. I didn't notice like any major differences. And I'm the backup for ILL. And I actually checked in with Tony Letrich, who's our interlibrary loan coordinator. And he also agreed, at least from what I told him, that he didn't really see any big issue changing to this setting. So.
Yeah, and I'm in charge of ILL as well as CERC, and it seems much more intuitive to me that this seems like a really nice change. My only question, and I haven't had a chance to play around, is does it in any way negatively affect searching, especially for like conventional patrons who are going to have a first and last name? Is there any negatives that, Mieko, is there any downside?
Not that I have seen in my testing. The nice way with how the quick search box and the find tool work is that they are indexed to look at like first, middle, last name, last, first, middle name. So they don't require you to put like separate out like here's the first name, here's the last name.
I think it'll also be very helpful for the universities. I remember being at one of the meetings when we were trying to debate how to set it up in formatting. And there was a big one about, well, it's, I don't know, University of Illinois, but they have 4 different libraries. Which library do you send it to? The bill. So this way you could have that A library with that address and then B library with that address. And that middle name is not necessarily hindering you to keep going through all of them. I think it would be a very good idea to have them as one long name.
So chat come through. What about patrons whose last name is unknown? So if the patron is like has what's called a mononym, right? They only go by a single name. Even though it's labeled as a last name field, it'll pretty much just serve as like just a general name field. If that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
So real quick, just for clarification, is the select, when you have that little option to select use a single name field, will that come with it? Like, will both go hand in hand, or is that just, so it says it's optional?
That would be another question then for the group. If we were to implement the single name only field, would we then also say, if you use this, you have to use a checkbox?
I think personally just saying for us, because we adhere to like data entry standards and registering patrons, and I could see having that additional like step of checking that box being good for us specifically to avoid making mistakes with the data entry guidelines. So
I agree. It doesn't seem like that much of an additional thing, and I'd prefer to have that fail safe, whatever, just so that if someone's rushing through or whatever the case may be, that we don't miss out on information that we need. We don't have a lot of folks that I know of that have tried to register with just one name. But yeah, no, I would like to have the force the checkbox option.
And I guess my question is with patrons, and since we're kind of talking about patrons, how does this affect the online library cards?
So the online, I made a note about this.
I didn't test it because I didn't have a link
ago.
to the training website or our training OPAC. So I didn't.
Yeah. So according to the documentation from Innovative, if single name only is active for PAC self-registration, patrons will still see and be able to fill out the first name field, but just like in LEAP, it won't be required.
Okay.
So let's go back to the ILO for Cooperative Computer Services branch. It sounds like being able to implement a single name only would be less confusing for staff entering ILO library accounts. Is that kind of the general feel one? Is this something that we would like to recommend to the Interlibrary Loan Tech Group? Or, because again, ILL doesn't meet until February, so we've got some time if you would feel more comfortable getting input from interlibrary loan staff before making a formal recommendation. I'm comfortable either way, making a recommendation now or waiting.
I'm waiting for those ILL people to speak up. I'm okay because it doesn't, it doesn't seem to have a downside, but,
Exactly, yeah.
yeah,
I would say I'm okay to motion to recommend it.
yeah.
Me three.
Yeah, I think I'd be okay with it. I mean, it's an opt-in.
If we did it for ILL, we would make this like the way to enter in ILL names. So can I have a motion to enable single name only for the ILL for Cooperative Computer Services branch?
I motion to enable single name only for the ILL for CCS branch.
May I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
I,
I,
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So we will recommend enabling the single name only for the ILL Tech Group. Again, at our next meeting, we can talk about what the name conventions will look like. So in between then and now, CCS will start thinking about what will look helpful. We'll probably solicit some input then from more ILL staff as in addition to users from this group. Okay, so that is one side of things. The other side, okay, is then enabling the setting for all other CCS branches. So again, let's look at current practice and what it would look like if it's enabled. So currently libraries may be using different conventions when they're entering users with mononyms or institutional names. So if we choose to enable the setting, we would again enable for all CCS library branches. And that's again to adhere to a consistent patron experience. What could be different this time than with the ILL branch, because of all the different practices, we would not be able to employ a global bulk change to records like we would with the ILL accounts. So in this scenario, CCS could work instead individually with libraries to determine options for bulk updates to name fields if it's appropriate for a group of your patrons, right? So if your library currently employs a certain convention for entering school names, we could then work with your library to do a bulk update for all of your cards with like a certain patron code or a certain statistical class. So again, some questions we have here is like, would there be a benefit for library branches to enable this? And then again, like if it is enabled, would we require staff to use that single name field checkbox for the patrons with a single name only? So I know we kind of discussed some nuances of this during the ILL, but I'm going to pause again for any more questions or discussion.
I kind of like it for in-house cards and for school cards. That's where I could see it being most beneficial for us. I haven't had anyone with just a single name yet.
No, I haven't either. But yeah, Kim, that's a good point. In-house accounts, I think, would be useful.
We've kind of contorted our school names and in-house name cards to so that when a hold slip prints, that we can tell who it is. So I guess that would be my question. What does a hold slip look like? Do you know, Mieko?
It would look the same
So the first five
as,
letters or four letters, whatever it is of the, okay. So yeah, okay, great. Yeah, that would be awesome.
yeah. And then there wouldn't be the big change that it's a really good question. The big change there is that there wouldn't be any, you know, you get the last name and then like the first name, there wouldn't be anything in the first name area.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That would be the only thing I would, that the reason that we handle some of our cards in a different way is because of that, just to make it easier for our circ staff to figure out who's getting what. Okay, great. Thanks.
I think earlier Kim had asked like what it would look on the patron end when logging in. And did you say that they would be able to remove their first name then?
Yeah, if they were registering, they were using like the PowerPack online registration, they would have the ability not to enter a first name. The field
Yeah.
would still appear, but it wouldn't like it would save
Okay.
if they didn't put anything there. And then actually, let me pull up that example in the training PowerPack and we could all look at it.
My brain just went to book clubs and I was really excited about a single name use for book
About
clubs.
it. Well,
I
and all
know.
the craziness with the holds. I mean, it's.
Yeah.
So yeah, there would definitely be some changes on our end of the way that we configure them.
And then in just the regular PowerPack account, the patron's name is not split up into two fields. So they would just see, if it was a last name only, they would just see whatever was in the last name field here. And I don't believe they are able to, they are not able to edit their name either. Just in the regular PowerPack, they need staff intervention for that.
Okay, cool. That's what I wanted to clarify, just because I was thinking of a family, because going in, removing all the names, the first names or something, and getting confused, thinking it's just a family card, because we get those questions a lot. So thank you.
So it looks like Niles has 9 patrons that have either no first name or no last name. So I think it would look cleaner because right now we're using the placeholders of FNU and LNU. And just to be more, culturally sensitive to their.
If this is a sidebar question, if Innovative is getting this fine detailed with things, are they also looking at updating the available pronouns? Sorry, it's just a sidebar question. Do you know?
Okay. I know in the gender field, there is a way for a site to like customize that list. I'm not aware of any pronoun field that's in the work though.
Okay. Just wondered. Thank you.
So then if this field was enabled for all CCS libraries, what that would mean was that all the libraries would have the ability to use this field, but then it would still be up to your local practices and how you applied it. So you could still then input your like business cards, fill out name fields for your business cards or your book club cards the way that you would want. And then I know we mentioned this earlier about using the single name field checkbox. So if we were to make this recommendation and the recommendation was accepted, I am kind of going in that direction that like we would instruct staff to use that checkbox if they were entering a single name only. Are there any concerns about enabling this field for live CCS libraries?
National change of address might be one of the things that comes up if you do use that field, or that system is one of the things I could see happening. But other than that, nothing off the top of my head.
Is this activating the setting something the group would recommend then to CircTech to enable? Or are we feeling pretty neutral about it?
I feel pretty neutral. I would say.
So I guess let me put it this way. Is this a field that you would recommend enabling to CircTech, or is this a field you'd be like, no, I would not recommend enabling?
I mean, I would recommend that they talk. I'd like to hear some more discussion from people with a little more, hands-on. But I'd be okay, having it go to that discussion part.
So I think this would go to the October CircTech group for extended discussion and approval. And then what recommendation would you like to make to the CircTech group? Would you recommend that they that they vote to enable the setting, or would you not recommend the setting?
I say enable. No one's saying anything.
Yeah.
Somebody say something.
I'll go ahead. I'll motion to recommend to enable single name only for all of their CCS libraries.
Mhm.
Do I have
I'll
a
second.
second?
I'll second, yeah.
Any second? All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. So we'll bring this to October Tech Group for discussion. And then if they are in agreement, the CircTech will then maybe approve the recommendation to enable the setting. And we can update guidelines if it gets to that. Okay. I'm going to reshare then for our last agenda topic. So this one is around MessageBee. So text messages are now delivered through MessageBee. CCS libraries have undeliverable message procedures, which includes what to do with bounced text notices. So these procedures include adjusting the patron's notice preference to either email or phone, so they don't get any further texts, and adding a non-blocking note to that there was a bounced text message like verify carrier. So message B supports an option to add a non-blocking note to the patron's record if it detects a bounced message. So the non-blocking note text would say, it would give the date, notification to, it would give the phone number, and then it would just say bounced. So we've already asked message B, this message text cannot be customized. And then message B is then asking for direction on if this option should be activated for libraries. So it's basically like for those bounce message procedures, like, do you want message B to take care of that note element, or do you still want to enter the note yourself?
That's a tough choice. I will let message B do it for me. Thank you.
Ditto.
Same here.
I agree.
Is it like at a certain amount, like after they try it the first time, it just automatically gets done to it? Or is it like at the end of the day or something? I mean, I don't know. I guess that'd be my only question.
That's a good question. I was just bringing under the assumption that it happened like at the same time.
Right. Yeah, that makes
But I have not
sense.
I've not formally asked or clarified on that.
Yeah, if it hits it one day, does it hit it the next day? And then do we lose all of that? You know how we only have so many characters we can put in that? Does it keep repeating it before, and then we lose the information below that we've entered regarding the patron?
Yeah. So here's the assumption though, that as the library is working with like the bounced alerts reports from message B, like you will be changing the patron then to like email or
Right.
phone notice.
Okay.
So they shouldn't be getting like repeat text messages.
Good call.
I know I like heard a lot of we want message B to do this type. Is there anyone who would prefer to do it manually? So this would be another recommendation that we take to CertTech for formal approval. I'm gonna stop one more opportunity for like questions or comments.
Mika, I just have a quick question. So the example that's here, that is the exact note itself. Okay. So then there's no way to know if it's the phone number that's incorrect versus the wireless carrier that was incorrect.
Right. It
Okay.
only gives the phone number.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
So when you log into the message B portal, you're able to like run a report, right? Because I've never seen it before, and you can like see history if it's happened multiple times for one patron. Kind of.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, you can also set up a daily email, like an email digest, and it will give you a report of like how many successful, how many bounces, and you can see like download an Excel sheet with bounces too. So message me, it's nice. It gives you multiple ways of like tracking patient, looking into history and that kind of thing. Would someone like to motion to recommend enabling the message be non-blocking note?
I motion to enable the message be non-blocking note.
I'll
Is there a
second it.
second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
I,
Aye.
Okay.
Any opposed? I'll take this recommendation to the October Circ Tech Group as well, and then hopefully it'll be one last little thing to do, one more thing to automate. So that takes us to the end of our agenda. It's about 10:40 a.m. Our next meeting is going to be held December 15th. Again, it'll be through Zoom. I will send out agenda information closer to the 15th. Any last comments, questions before we formally adjourn? May I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Danny moves. A second?
I'll second it, Kim.
Okay. All in favor?
I.
Aye.
Let's see. Any opposed? Okay. We are adjourned at 10:40 a.m.
Cool.
Let's